It's a cold Rhode Island morning in March of 1892, the kind where your breath freezes in the air and the ground still remembers winter. A small crowd gathers in a cemetery. Farmers, church folk, doctors, and the curious. They stand before the cemetery's stone crypt, preparing to open a coffin. Because today, they aren't looking for peace, they're looking for the undead. And when they open the coffin of 19-year-old Mercy Brown, what they find becomes one of the strangest cases of vampire panic in American history. Yes, you heard me right, vampires in America. A vampire and a story that may have reached all the way across the ocean to an Irish writer named Bram Stoker, possibly inspiring the world's most famous vampire of all. Welcome back, my kindred spirits. I'm May, and this is the Dark Folio, where history whispers, folklore stirs, and the past sometimes reaches farther than we expect. I hope you all are staying warm. Tennessee has experienced some sleet, but so far we are fine on the snow front, although my friends and family in Kentucky and Ohio cannot say the same. They have already seen some snow and already had some snow days at school. My kids are still waiting. They haven't had snow days yet, and I'm hoping it's way up until February before we see anything like that. I just do not like the snow. Also, this is round 2 on trying to get this story of Mercy Brown and America's Last Vampire out. I don't know why the stars were not aligned last week. Maybe it was Thanksgiving. Maybe it was fate. I don't know. But my computer would not work. And after recording the entire thing, it completely crashed and I lost all of it. So I was done and we just had to have a dark week last week. I'm so sorry, guys, that I missed you. But, we're back here this week. We're going to try to redo and carry through and hope that this week is not a dark week as well, because I like telling the tales and telling the stories and talking with you guys. If you haven't already, go check out my Facebook page, the Dark Folio page, because if something happens that I can't record and you're wondering where it is, or you want updates or any information about anything that's going on here on the podcast, that's where I put the information. That's where I put out last week that I wasn't going to be able to have a podcast for the week. And I hope that you all knew what was going on. Anyway, tonight we're opening a case buried under ice, fear, and superstition. The legend of Mercy Lena Brown, sometimes called the last vampire of New England. Was she a monster, a victim, or simply a young woman swallowed by a community desperate for answers? Let's find out, and let's turn the page on our Dark Folio story. It's the late 1800s in Exeter, Rhode Island. Deserted Exeter, they called it, one of the border towns, a subsistence farming community where the soil was rocky and unforgiving. Rocks, rocks, and more rocks, as the locals described it. Farmers built stone walls from all the boulders that they couldn't plow around. And the Civil War had also taken its toll. The railroads were luring young men west to richer land. By 1892, Exeter's population had dropped to just 961 people, and that was down from over 2,500 in its heyday. Winters were brutal. Illness spread quickly, and tuberculosis, then known as consumption, was ravaging families one by one. Here's what makes consumption or tuberculosis so terrifying. It was only identified as a bacterial disease in 1882, just a decade before our story really takes place, and right at the beginning of our story. German scientist Robert Koch discovered the bacteria, but germ theory wouldn't take hold in rural America for years yet. Before that, people had no idea what caused it. They only knew that victims wasted away slowly. They had pale skin, sunken eyes, and they were coughing up blood. During certain periods in the late 1700s, tuberculosis killed up to 2% of the entire New England population. It remained the leading cause of death throughout the 19th century, accounting for nearly 25% of all deaths. You can figure that was 1 in 4, so almost every family was touched by tuberculosis. And the Brown family, well, they knew this horror intimately. George Brown was a Yankee farmer, a pragmatic, church-going man who tilled the rocky soil and provided for his family. In December of 1883, and remember, that was only identified as a bacterial disease in 1882, so this is just really right after its discovery. He loses his wife, Mary Eliza, to consumption. She was only 36 years old. 6 months later, in June of 1884, his oldest daughter, Mary Olive, dies at the age of 20. One newspaper notes that she, quote, suffered greatly but patiently in her final days. For 7 years, the family has peace. George still has his remaining children, Edwin, who is a big husky man working as a store clerk at the Farmers Exchange and General Variety store over in Wickford, and Mercy Lena, about to turn 19, his daughter, and then he had 2 younger daughters. So as a family, they grieve, but they start to heal and they try to move forward. And then in 1891, Edwin begins wasting away. And by the end of the year, in late 1891, Mercy Lena, everyone called her Lena, well, she also falls ill. So Edwin is married now. He's living with his wife in Wickford. As his condition worsens, he begins having terrible dreams at night, dreams of suffocation. He wakes up each morning complaining that something has drained the blood from his body. Friends recommend a desperate measure: travel to Colorado Springs, where the mountain air and the mineral waters are said to cure consumption. It's expensive. It's far. It's halfway across the country. But when you're dying, well, you'll try anything. So Edwin and his wife make the journey west. They stay for several months, and at first it seems to work. Edwin actually improves. The fresh air, the altitude, the spa waters, maybe they are saving his life. But back in Rhode Island, on January 17th, 1892, devastating news. His younger sister, Lena, has died. She'd only been sick a year. The quote-unquote galloping kind of consumption, that's what they called it, the galloping kind, that moved terrifyingly fast. A doctor attended her final days and told George there was nothing more medicine could do. Her obituary is brief and heartbreaking. Miss Lena Brown, who has been suffering from consumption, died Sunday morning. Well, Edwin returns home to bury his sister. He's healthier than when he left. He's stronger. But within weeks of coming back to Rhode Island, weeks of being back in the old house, the old air, the old grief, Edwin's condition deteriorates rapidly. Whatever Colorado gave him has vanished. He grows weaker. He coughs blood. And at night, gripped by fear, he begins crying out in his sleep again. She was here. She wants me to come with her. She haunts me. Dark whispers start circling through Exeter. This isn't normal. This isn't natural. Someone in the Brown family must be feeding on Edwin from beyond the grave. How else do you explain his sudden decline the moment he returns? How else do you explain 4 deaths in one family? Well, here's something you need to understand about rural New England in 1892. These people weren't overly religious. Only about 10% belonged to churches. But they were deeply superstitious. Folklore ran thick in their veins, brought over by Slavic and Germanic immigrants in the 1700s, by Hessian mercenaries who served in the Revolutionary War. These stories about the undead, no, they didn't use the word vampire yet, not commonly. They had been passed down through generations. And there is precedent for this. This isn't the first time. In 1796, right there in Rhode Island, they dug up Sarah Tillinghast under the same suspicions. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, there would be at least 80 documented cases of vampire exhumations in New England. People burned organs, they mixed ashes with water, and they fed them to the sick. You heard that right. It sounds barbaric to us now. Not healthy at all. But imagine living in a time where 1 in 4 people died of a disease you couldn't understand, when families were wiped out one after another, when the best doctors could only shake their hands and say, "We've done what we can. Now we have to wait." It could well feel like you were under siege from life-draining creatures. Neighbors go to George Brown with a theory. Perhaps one of his dead family members, his wife, or Mary Olive, or Mercy Lena, isn't truly dead. Perhaps she's feeding on Edwin's living tissue and blood. If they can find the offending corpse and destroy it, Edwin will recover. The neighbors ask permission to exhume the bodies. George resists. He's a rational man. He does not believe in the superstition. From the very beginning, he disclaims any faith in the vampire theory. But he's also desperate. He's already buried his wife and 2 daughters, and he still has 2 younger daughters at home. What if they're next? His only son is dying. So George Brown gives his permission, but on one condition. The local doctor must be present. Dr. Harold Metcalf from Wickford. He'd attended Lena during her final illness. He's an intelligent man, a believer in scientific method. He'll observe and record what they find. Dr. Metcalf is skeptical. He thinks this is superstitious nonsense. He discourages the exhumation entirely, tells them it will be in vain. But George insists, and Dr. Metcalf agrees to come. Perhaps it was out of concern for public health, perhaps out of duty to the family he'd served. George also invites a reporter from the Providence Journal, Rhode Island's biggest newspaper, because if this is going to happen, let it be documented, let it be witnessed. On the morning of March 17th, 1892, the party gathers at Chestnut Hill Cemetery. George Brown is not among them. He cannot bear to witness the exhumations. Edwin is too ill to leave his bed, so he stays behind at his father-in-law's house. Dr. Metcalf is there with his staff and a small group of Exeter residents and the newspaper reporter who's taking notes. They bring shovels and they begin. First, they exhume Mary Eliza, dead for 9 years. The coffin opens. Bones. She's nothing but bones. Advanced decay exactly as expected. They make a note of it. They move on. Next, Mary Olive, dead for 8 years. Again, bones. Rotting corpse. Natural decomposition. So far, nothing unusual, nothing supernatural. But then they turn to Mercy Lena. Here's the crucial detail. Lena died in January, in the dead of winter. The ground was frozen solid. It was too hard to dig a grave, so her body wasn't buried. It was placed in the cemetery's above-ground stone crypt, a triangular structure made of cold stone. Essentially, a natural freezer. She'd been there only for 9 weeks, and when they opened her coffin, the men stepped back in horror, because Lena looks almost alive. Her face appears flushed with color. Her skin is soft to the touch. Some accounts say her body had shifted position, lying on her side when she'd been laid out straight. It even seems to their terrified eyes that her hair and nails have grown. One of the men prods her chest with a spade. Liquid blood. Now, Dr. Metcalf tries to reason with them. The reports say that he examines her lungs and finds clear signs of tuberculosis. He explains that the lack of decomposition is perfectly consistent with the body kept in near freezing temperatures for 2 months. This is cold preservation, basic biology. Remember, they didn't have all of the science that we have now. They just did not understand. The townspeople of Exeter, primed on folklore and desperate for answers, said, "This isn't natural preservation from cold storage. This is proof. This is the undead." And the decision is made on the spot. They will perform an anti-vampire ritual, one rooted in old world traditions that somehow survived the Atlantic crossing, passed down through generations who brought their fears with them. Dr. Metcalf removed Lena's heart, liver, and lungs, and he places them on a nearby rock slab. The townspeople gather firewood, they kindle a bonfire right there in the cemetery, and they burn her organs to ash. As the smoke rises and the organs crackle in the flames, the men stand in grim silence. Some later retellings would claim that one of the townspeople beheaded the corpse, a detail that does appear in other New England vampire cases, but no contemporary account mentions of this happening to Mercy. So, what we know for certain is this: her heart was cut out and burned to cinders, and the ashes were carefully collected. They were mixed with water and consumption medicine and turned into a tonic. They carry it to Edwin at his father-in-law's house. The belief is simple, ancient, and desperate. Consuming the ashes will break the vampire's hold. The undead cannot feed on you if you've consumed the power. And Edwin drinks his sister's ashes. Oh, I mean, that's nasty, right? And I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor by any means. But I cannot believe that that is healthy. You are taking ashes that were from people's organs that had died from tuberculosis, and consuming them. I can't even imagine that burning them and having that ash floating in the air is safe, healthy. I don't know. But anyway, Edwin drinks his sister's ashes, but it doesn't work. Edwin dies 6 weeks later on May 2nd, 1892. He was 24 years old. Lena was reburied in the frozen ground. But her story was only beginning. Now, the scandal, this exhumation, it goes public. Dr. Metcalf probably was the likely source. The incident is leaked to the press almost immediately. 2 days later, the Providence Journal publishes a prominent article in its March 19th, 1892 issue titled, "Exhumed the Bodies." The story spreads like wildfire. A follow-up article on March 21st describes the ritual in gruesome detail, explains vampire folklore, and it openly condemns what is called a barbaric superstition, a horrible superstition. Even at the time, this was controversial. A letter to the editor published in the Pawtuxet Valley Gleaner on March 25th, 1892, tries to kind of defend the townspeople. I don't know. It says, "While we do not blame anyone for their proceedings, as they were intended without doubt to relieve the anxiety of the living, still it seems incredible that human beings living in the latter part of the 19th century could give credence to such an outlandish idea." So there's that. I mean, kind of defends the townspeople, but also says they were kind of silly to believe that that was a thing. Well, the story doesn't just stay local. A well-known anthropologist named George Stetson travels to Rhode Island to investigate this barbaric superstition. He publishes an account in the prestigious American Anthropologist Journal, and the story makes waves throughout the world. Foreign newspapers pick it up. The London Post even weighs in, declaring that whatever drove the Yankee vampire, it was definitely an American problem, and absolutely not the product of British folk tradition, even though many Exeter families could trace their lineage directly back to England. The incident becomes internationally known, and it reaches Ireland. And here's where folklore may have met literary history. You see, Bram Stoker was working on Dracula throughout the 1890s. He was a meticulous researcher, a collector of newspaper clippings, folklore accounts, historical records. He kept extensive notes, pasting articles into his research files. When Bram Stoker died in 1912, historians examined his papers. Among them, newspaper clippings about the Mercy Brown exhumation, cut from American papers and pasted into his notes. He had read the story. Now, scholars debate what influence it had. Some argue there wasn't enough time. Mercy died in 1892. Dracula was published in 1897. That's only 5 years. Wasn't the manuscript already too far along to have a lot of influence from the Mercy Brown story. Others point to the parallels in the story. In the story, the character Lucy was slowly wasting away. There was the exhumation scene, there was blood found in the corpse, the desperate family trying to save a loved one, there was newspaper coverage, the international scandal, there was the mixture of science with the character of Dr. Seward and the superstition with Van Helsing. And then there's the character of Lucy, who even has a name that kind of echoes Lena. Lucy, Lena, both young women, both dying of something that drains them, both exhumed, both found with blood still in their bodies. We can't say for certain that Mercy Brown inspired parts of Dracula, but the timing is intriguing, and the imagery is uncanny, and the emotional arc is almost identical. It's entirely possible that a 19-year-old girl from Exeter, Rhode Island, traveled farther in death than she ever did in life, crossing the Atlantic in newspaper form to help shape the world's most iconic vampire. The case also influenced American horror. H.P. Lovecraft, who was Rhode Island's own master of cosmic dread, directly references Mercy Brown in the story The Shunned House. He writes about an Exeter community that exhumed a dead body and ceremoniously burnt its heart in order to prevent certain alleged visitations. Well, what happened to Exeter after the ritual? The death stopped. George Brown, one of the only members of his immediate family who never contracted tuberculosis, lived until 1922. He was 80 years old, living just long enough to see scientists develop the BCG vaccine that would finally help prevent the disease that destroyed his family. His youngest daughter, Hattie Mae, survived into adulthood, and there was a quilt that Mercy had stitched shortly after her mother and sister died. It was evidence of her very creative spirit and her life before the disease. Well, that quilt is preserved and occasionally shown to the public by extended family descendants. But Mercy's story stuck. It lingered in libraries, folklore collections, and ghost lore like frost that never quite melts. And that's where I found it. Somewhere along the books of the library that I still love today in the folklore collections. After the Mercy Brown exhumation, no one in Rhode Island ever dug up a suspected vampire again. She was the last. The age of scientific medicine was finally dawning. The practice of embalming was reaching rural areas, making it implausible to imagine the dead rising. The vampire panic that had gripped New England for over a century finally, mercifully ended. But the legends remained. Today, Mercy's grave sits in Chestnut Hill Cemetery off Route 102. A simple marble marker. Mercy L., daughter of George T. and Mary E. Brown, died January 17, 1892, aged 19 years. Nothing theatrical, nothing monstrous, just a name and a date. But there is something unusual. A metal band secures the gravestone to the ground, installed to prevent theft, because this grave attracts pilgrims. Visitors still leave coins, flowers, little vampire trinkets, even notes. There's a Tupperware container with a notebook where people sign in. On any given day, you'll find fresh offerings. Some report seeing a blue ball of light hovering over the grave. Others claim they hear a girl's voice whispering, "Please help me. Let me out." Perhaps it's imagination. Perhaps it's the wind sighing through the trees. Or perhaps the spirit of Mercy Brown, of Lena, the creative teenager who made quilts and never asked to become a legend, still lies restless in her grave. The triangular stone crypt where her body was stored through those cold winter months stands directly across from the Brown family plot. For years, curious visitors could peer inside, could stand where townspeople once stood when they opened her coffin. But sometime in the 2010s, the entrance was sealed against legend trippers. The crypt remains, a monument to fear, to grief, to what happens when we can't explain death, And so we create stories that make sense of the senseless. Thanks for turning the page with me tonight. I'm May, and this has been the Dark Folio. Mercy Brown, Lena, reminds us that folklore isn't always born from monsters. Sometimes it's born from grief, from fear, from tuberculosis, claiming 1 in 4 lies, from watching your family die and being powerless to stop it. It's born from the stories we tell when nothing else makes sense, when science fails us, when medicine has no answers, when all we have left is ritual and hope and desperate measures. Mercy Brown wasn't a monster. She was a victim 3 times over. First of a disease that ravaged her family, then of a community so desperate that they turned her into something she never was, and finally of history itself, becoming more famous in death than she ever could have been in life. If you've enjoyed wandering with me through history's dark shadows tonight, don't forget to follow, subscribe, rate, review the Dark Folio. Check out the Facebook page, The Dark Folio. You can find the Dark Folio wherever you listen to your podcast. I even upload it to YouTube. Those little clicks really help the show reach new kindred spirits, just like you, just like me, people all over the world that likes folklore, ghost stories, cryptids, things of the bizarre, of the unknown. So if you would share it, if you would tell your friends, if you would like, review, click, all of those little things that only take a few seconds, that would mean so much to me. These podcasts like this, they don't just magically bloom into something big overnight. It takes a while to get out there for people to find us. But we keep plugging along because we like telling the stories. So until next time, as long as my computer holds out, there is always a story to tell. So keep the candle lit, keep the pages turning, and remember, not every monster stays in the stories. Because sometimes the real monsters are diseases like tuberculosis, or things like poverty, and the fear that comes with it. You'll have a blessed night, and I will check back again with you soon from the Dark Folio.